Left alone, Europe's security strategy and the role of the Eastern European countries is the topic of this year's special talk. And we're very pleased, no, we're very proud of welcoming two very distinguished guests who will discuss this year's topic. Please welcome the President of the Republic of Kosovo, Dr. Osmani-Sadriu. Very welcome. And welcome Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger, friend of M100, the former head of the Munich Security Conference. President Osmani-Sadriu, Ambassador Ischinger, the stage is yours. We're looking forward to the talk. Thank you.
So welcome, everybody. Welcome, Madam President. It's a fantastic privilege for me to be sitting here in this, heart of historic Potsdam, Prussian Kings, with the head of state of a country that acquired its independence in 2008. And I'm really so excited to be sitting here with you, Madam President, because a significant part of my career as a diplomat had to do with events in the Western Balkans, including with your country. And I would like to simply start by reminding all of us that as we focus at this moment at the terrible war that's going on, war of aggression that's going on in eastern Ukraine, the number of victims, the numbers of people killed in conflict in the Balkans, first in the conflict around Bosnia and Herzegovina, but then also in the conflict in 98, 99 in Kosovo, between Kosovo and Serbia, the number of victims far exceeds, the dimension of the bloodshed far exceeds that what we have seen so far in Ukraine. Just to put things in the right perspective, Southeastern Europe suffered dreadful things in the 1990s and beyond. So let me start, if I may, Madam President, let me start our discussion. And we have only 45 minutes, and I hope that after a little bit of a conversation between the two of us, we can open it up. So if you have a question to ask or a comment to make your interest known to me, and I'll try to call on you. So my first question would be, tell this audience, if you could, a little bit where you think your country is now, in this decade and a half after achieving independence, and where you want it to be, hopefully with a little bit of help from your German friends in the next 2, 3, 5 years.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you all for having me here today in this important discussion. It is a great pleasure to represent the people of Kosovo, the youngest nation in Europe, the country of youth. In 2008, we were the youngest country in Europe, and we still are, but not just in terms of the years for which our country has existed, but also in terms of the age of our population. As you know, more than 50% of the people of Kosovo are under 25, and more than 2/3 under 35, so it is a huge potential for Europe. So I'd like to start by saying that Kosovo today is an established democracy. Kosovo today is a thriving country, and it's a beacon of hope for the region and beyond. It is the greatest embodiment of what the democratic world can achieve when it stands together to defend the values of freedom, democracy, and human rights. That's what Kosovo is today, more than 14 years after declaring independence. The second thing that Kosovo embodies is how important alliances are, especially when we're talking about a clash of values. Back in 1998, 1999, it was because democratic countries stood together in an alliance that it turned out to save our lives. And in the same way today, I think those same values are at stake in Ukraine, and it does show how important these partnerships and alliances are. And it does show that our real power as democratic countries lies precisely in our partnerships. Obviously, Kosovo today is facing the same kind of economic ramifications as other countries in Europe. So we're dealing with a high inflation, we're dealing with problems with our energy, but the resilience of the people of Kosovo is absolutely unquestionable. And it's because the people that I represent have shown this resilience throughout their entire history. We were victims of an aggressor whose aim was to exterminate our people just because we belong to a different nationality. The deep wounds from the war are still very much there. In a matter of months, as you mentioned, Mr. Ambassador, in just a few months in Kosovo, more than 13,000 innocent civilians were killed. Around 20,000 women were raped as a tool of war by the genocidal regime of Milosevic. 128,000 houses were individually burned down, not through bombs, individually. So many cultural heritage, so many artifacts destroyed. Practically, Kosovo was burned down to ashes. So we built our country from scratch, but with the help of our partners, which brings me to the third point. Kosovo has shown throughout its history how important it is to have friends. We would not have survived back in 1999 if we did not have these alliances, if we did not have democratic countries like Germany, the United States, and other countries around the world supporting us. And we would not have been able to achieve the successes that are our pride today if it was not for our friends. The democratic world stood by us not only until 1999, but every step of the way while we built our statehood, gained our recognitions, membership in international organizations, and today we welcome the chance to give back. So practically we were the very first country to say yes to the request by the United States to support Afghan refugees. And we were the very first country in the Western Balkans to fully align sanctions against Russia with the European Union. We are at a 100% alignment with the EU, although we still don't have a candidate status. Because no matter how hard the path towards Euro-Atlantic integration may be, there's absolutely nothing that can take us away from that path. It is our vision, it is our fate, but let me be clear, we didn't just leave it up to fate. We're working hard for it. We're working hard for it, and especially the institutions in this past 1.5 years are undertaking unprecedented and record-paced reforms in the area of rule of law, human rights, and further development of democracy, because we believe that democracy is never a finite or finished project. But no matter the challenges, the people of Kosovo will continue their resilience until the moment where we are where we belong, and we belong in the European Union and NATO.
Great. I'm sure, Madam President, when you meet with representatives of the German government, whether it's the foreign minister or the chancellor, I'm sure you will be extremely directly talking to them not only about your desire to conclude this trip, this voyage in the direction of the European Union and certainly also of NATO, but you will, I'm sure, also express the discontent, the degree of dissatisfaction with the speed, etc. And I wonder whether you could talk a little bit about how Kosovars feel about the fact that this process, these promises, these unfulfilled promises have now been going on for, as far as I can tell, for many of my friends in the region for too long, while all of a sudden, because of this new war in Eastern Europe, Ukraine gets, recognized as a country with a direct EU perspective, just like that. So how big is the disappointment? How big is the desire to change the situation among Kosovars?
Let me first clarify that whenever there is disappointment, like with the issue of visa liberalization, the disappointment is not with the fact that the European Union gave the candidate status to Ukraine. The people of Ukraine are putting their lives at stake for the very values that stand in the foundations of the European Union. So we are absolutely supportive of that decision that the European Union took when it comes to a candidate status for Ukraine. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that we will not keep fighting, and you know me very well, so all we do is really be extremely direct. So of course we will be very direct in every single conversation with our friends and partners. And being direct, I have to say, the EU credibility is at stake when it comes to the decision on visa liberalization for Kosovo. And we're not asking to be favored. We're not asking for any shortcut. Kosovo has fulfilled criteria 4.5 years ago, almost. The European Commission has long recommended visa liberalization for Kosovo. The European Parliament has overwhelmingly supported this decision more than twice, and now it's up to the individual member states to deliver upon their promise. And I think it would also be an excellent message that when democracies deliver, the European Union does keep its promise. Let me also mention the fact that the lack of this decision has not only damaged the credibility of the EU among the people of Kosovo, and I would say wider, but at the same time it damages the potential of the people of Kosovo. We're talking about young people who are not able to come to a conference like this, or journalists who would want to join you today to speak of these important topics, but because they can't get an appointment for a visa, they can actually join you and give their contribution. Or we're talking about tourists who would come to visit beautiful Potsdam. Ultimately, it's about the sense of freedom, and freedom lies at the very foundations of the European Union. But we need to be clear on one thing: visa liberalization is separate from the European integration path. So that's why Kosovo this year is applying for a candidate status by the end of this year during the Czech presidency. And I think every single European Union member will have a file in front of them, an application in front of them that they should be proud of. They should be proud that they have contributed to a country that today is applying for a candidate status, which really works hard on rule of law, on democracy, on human rights, and other values and criteria which are set by the European Union. So, of course, we know that this is going to be a long process, but we hopefully believe that after everything that happened since the 24th of February of this year, that finally the EU understands that having also the Western Balkans join the European Union, it's of a geostrategic importance. It's not a checklist of technical criteria. It's also in the geostrategic interest of the EU itself to have the Western Balkans within it. Otherwise, without peace and stability, which can only be finally achieved through our membership in the EU, without peace and stability in this region, there will be no peace and stability in the entire continent.
I couldn't agree more with that statement. In fact, Madam President, I would take it in the German context, I would take it even a step further. You know, we've been talking in this country ever since the 27th of February, 3 days after the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, of the Zeitenwende, the change of an era, the end of an era, the beginning of a new one. Zeitenwende is the term that Olaf Scholz used to describe these fundamental changes that confront Germany. And my thought is, this requires not only a new policy vis-à-vis Russia, and of course a very forthcoming policy vis-à-vis the country that's been attacked, Ukraine. We're not going to talk here about weapons deliveries to Ukraine, but this is an issue that's of course all over our news, like everybody else's news at the moment. But I think that Germans should understand, Europeans should understand, that this Zeitenwende phenomenon, this Zeitenwende challenge, is not going to be completely understood if we leave Southeastern Europe out of it. So my thesis would be completing and accelerating the European approach and accession process for countries who are now still in the waiting room of the EU, including your own. That should be regarded as part of our to-do list, which has become, because of this ongoing war, a very urgent to-do list, not just a to-do list for the next 10 years, but a to-do list for right now. That brings me to my next question. Why is Kosovo held back to some extent, politically speaking? You have a neighbor by the name of Serbia, who of course still believes that they can, for whatever ideological or domestic reasons, cannot accept the fact that Kosovo exists as an independent nation. Can you talk to the audience a little bit about the state of play, of the dialogue, but also of the difficulties? I think everybody in this room saw the news only a few weeks ago about the conflict regarding certain ID matters, etc., and how that was resolved. But this is, of course, not the end of the problems. So talk to us a little bit about President Vučić and how you and your government talk to them, and to what extent the EU can be helpful in this.
Thank you for bringing that up, and bringing that up immediately after talking about Russia and Ukraine. And perhaps I should take that in the same order. So Russia is a country that believes that they should have a say on how sovereign, how independent others should be, and how others should exercise these powers when deciding about international organizations or so. And practically looks at other countries in that region as temporary states. The same with Serbia, absolutely the same. They look at not only Kosovo, but also they look at Montenegro, they look at Bosnia with that exact same eye. So practically they believe that they should decide on our fate after committing genocide against our people. That's absolutely unacceptable. And it should be absolutely unacceptable for everyone, especially since Serbia has never apologized, never showed any repent, did not put the perpetrators before justice. And there are still countless massive graves around Serbia with missing persons from Kosovo, from Bosnia and Herzegovina, from Croatia. So I think context truly matters, because sometimes we get stuck in what nowadays we're calling the both-sidism. So calls for both sides to de-escalate, calls for both sides not to fight, calls for both sides to do this or that. What happens in North Kosovo is not just some quarrel between two countries. What happens in North Kosovo should be seen in the context, in a geopolitical context of Russia's absolute influence over Serbia. It is unfortunate for all of us in the region that our neighbor has turned into a Russian proxy and is carrying out Russian intentions to destabilize the Western Balkans, because by destabilizing the Western Balkans, they fight the values-based systems that the European Union and NATO are. So by fighting us, they're actually fighting all of you. It's not just two countries fighting over ID cards. It's Serbia exercising every single melody that Putin is playing. Vučić is dancing to Putin's tune. That's what's happening. He's playing by Putin's playbook. And it's unfortunate for all of us because it's holding the entire region back through these kind of tensions. Now, of course, despite of the fact that Serbia has never apologized and never delivered justice for the victims that it caused during the Milosevic regime, never distanced themselves even today, as you know, from the Milosevic crimes, because the president of Serbia used to serve as the Minister of Propaganda for Milosevic, so no surprise there. Despite of all this, Kosovo has extended the hand of cooperation, and we sat down and we've been doing this dialogue for about 12 years now. So after Kosovo declared independence and the International Court of Justice said that that independence was in line with international law, it was time to sit down with Serbia and discuss not the status of Kosovo. That has been resolved once and forever. It's an irreversible reality, but to discuss the status of our bilateral relations as two independent countries, to discuss issues like diplomas, IDs, recognition of documents, and so on and so forth. Despite of what has been signed in these 12 years, Serbia has not implemented most of these agreements signed. So what we're trying to do right now, as you asked about the state of the play, but I just can't help talk about the context, is that we're trying to make Serbia implement what it signs. For example, on energy, on ID cards, on license plates, because Serbia itself has agreed to recognize each other's documents and signs and symbols. But once we try to implement it, what they do is, guess what? Again, bring tanks in front of the border. Have the Russian ambassador to Serbia come to give blessings to these tanks so that they can attack Kosovo. And recently also a documentary on Russian state TV encouraging Serbia to what they call reclaim Kosovo through war for an issue of registration plates of cars. So I think the international community should help us out, defend not just our country, not just what we have achieved, not just our borders, our territorial integrity, but defend what we've built together, because they are after that.
Tell me if I'm wrong. What I believe you're trying to tell us here is that the policy conducted for quite some time, but including right now, by President Vučić and his government in Belgrade is a kind of a policy of appeasement, or let me turn it the other way around. We, the EU, are vulnerable to the accusation that our policy is a policy of appeasement because Belgrade has not, for example, joined even one or two or three of the sanctions decisions that we've adopted regarding Russia, et cetera, et cetera. So we are too soft on Serbia? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, and I think it's extremely dangerous, not just because of us, but because so much more is at stake. Let me give you a couple of examples. In the morning, Serbia shoots at our border police. In the afternoon, Vučić talks about peace. In the morning, they burn down border points, central offices. In the afternoon, he talks about peace. So he does talk about peace. He talks about the EU, but he never walks the talk. And the evidence is so clear in the eyes of the European Union. So he brings long military-scale weapons inside of Kosovo, weaponizes the minority community in Kosovo, has created and finances and pushes politically illegal structures who are now in the blacklist of the United States, the US Treasury, people linked to transnational crime. And despite of all this happening, still the EU believes that Vučić is in the EU path. He has not adopted sanctions against Russia. All of the businesses which Germany and other countries have put, the oligarchs and others, on the sanctions list, they have a safe haven in Belgrade. More than 300 businesses have opened offices in Belgrade. They have a so-called Russian humanitarian center in the border with Kosovo, which according to the Department of Defense in the United States is a Russian spy center. They are planning to open a Russian defense office in Belgrade. And Of course, let me not start about links with China and not joining the EU in sanctions against Iran and so on. So practically, on one side, you have Kosovo, a country that is 100% in alignment with the EU. And on the other side, you have Vučić, who's trying to walk both on Moscow's path and EU path. You can't walk on both, especially when these paths are so far away from one another. So I think history shows, and you know this better than me, because you've been a diplomat for so long and followed developments not just in our region but also beyond. History shows and teaches us that appeasement only emboldens, only encourages autocrats. And I think it would be the wrong path to continue. I do hope that the more direct the EU is on its action and policy towards Serbia, the more it will help Serbia itself get away from Putin. But if, you know, they continue to appease him, I honestly just see Serbia getting closer to Russia rather than the EU, which in turn then it's hurting all of us. It's hurting the entire region, knowing Russia's intentions to create tensions, to create wars, and then in turn, of course, create destabilization in the entire European continent. So if, in fact, through this policy, the EU, in fact, it's hurting the entire continent, not just our region. And I really do hope that they will understand this sooner rather than later. And let me be clear, I'm not talking about all EU countries here. There are countries that are very much aware and have different policies, and there are countries that have already called for suspension of accession talks with Serbia because they have not joined sanctions. But I'm talking about the EU in its entirety, and mostly EU institutions, and the both-sidism virus that sometimes it's not helping the situation.
You are so sophisticated that you have not mentioned so far, but I'm going to push you a little bit to mention it, the fact that there are, since 2008, unwaveringly 5 EU members that have not decided to recognize diplomatically your country. And that is, in my view, of course, not only a huge deficit in terms of the credibility and the decisiveness and the capabilities of the European Union. It's a sign of weakness, of internal division, and a lack of capacity to act. But the question I'd like to ask you is, in your view, do you think we could do more to get these 5 to come over from their side of the fence? What can be done to resolve this situation?
Absolutely. I think that every single European Union member that has rightly recognized the independence of Kosovo can help a lot in convincing the 5 remaining countries to take this decision as soon as possible. They have nothing to lose from taking such a decision. Quite the opposite. They have a lot to win a credible partner within the Euro-Atlantic institution, a partner with which they can work whenever the values on which we stand are at stake. We understand we're a small country, but we believe that we do have a mighty voice and a very important story to tell internationally. And for that reason, we want to work with partners in whatever we can. But perhaps I would add that while the 5 non-recognizers are a problem when some decisions, not all, are taken on Kosovo, because let me add, they're not against visa liberalization for Kosovo, for example. I don't think they are the problem, or probably I shouldn't mention individual countries, but on the policy towards Serbia for their links to Russia, I don't think the fact whether these 5 countries have recognized Kosovo or not play a role. So the European Union as such should be united when asking Serbia to align with foreign and security policy of the EU, because they even have a legal obligation to do so, unlike us, because we still are not a candidate country, but we fully align. But on that, they should stand united, because non-recognition of Kosovo should not stop them from asking other Western Balkan countries to fully align when it comes to sanctions against Russia, and not help Putin carry this unprovoked war against Ukraine.
I'm going to turn to the audience in just a second. I mean, just to add one additional little question to what you've just said. In fact, what you're telling us is that if the European Union fell apart, there is some concern that as we look at approaching elections in Italy, as we look at continuing, resistance by Viktor Orban to certain decisions proposed in Brussels, there is some degree of risk that the EU could fall apart over the Russian sanctions point. And I think it's important for us to remember that would not only be a huge problem for how we deal with the Russian war in Ukraine, it would also mean that we give, free rein to Russia's policies and Serbia's policies by proxy in your part of Europe, which means, and I'm sure everybody here understands that, which means that these issues, whether one likes it or not, are interconnected. We should not think, I can only repeat that Kosovo and your neighborhood has nothing to do with Ukraine. Through Russia, through Serbia, and various other connections, they're all interconnected, and which is why I repeat, our Zeitenwende needs to take a comprehensive approach to these issues. Now, we have maybe time for 3 or 4 questions. I see in the first row. By the way, if you want to ask a question, be kind enough to introduce yourself. Let us know who you are. This person doesn't need to introduce himself because we all know him. This is General Ben Hodges, formerly of the U.S. Army, and now working as a very prominent think tanker. General, please. Do you want my...
I want you to answer the question. Ambassador, thank you. Madam President, Ben Hodges, NATO's KFOR, the Kosovo force, are you satisfied with it, or would you like to see NATO do something different, more or less, with the KFOR?
We're satisfied with KFOR, but what we would like NATO to do different is to let us in. Because to be in NATO means to be safe. Kosovo has contributed to peace and stability in the region, as you rightly know, for over 2 decades since we were liberated back in 1999. And our army has been built absolutely on NATO standards with the help of NATO, trained in NATO countries. We're already participating in peacekeeping missions alongside the U.S. Army. And I believe that it's about time that accelerating the process for membership for both Kosovo as well as Bosnia-Herzegovina would be such a huge contribution towards further enhancing stability in our region. Because when Albania, North Macedonia, and Montenegro joined NATO, that's exactly what it led to, more stability in our region. Just to give you the weird situation that sometimes we have to deal with. And for example, we're trying to join Partnership for Peace as the first step towards joining NATO. But the invitation for us needs to be unanimous. So in NATO, there are 4 countries that have not recognized us yet. But guess who you have in the Partnership for Peace? Serbia is there, although they say they never want to join NATO. That's what they say. They call NATO an aggressor. 2 days ago, they did that. I'm not talking about quotes from 20 years ago. So they never want to join NATO, yet they are allowed to participate in Partnership for Peace. And just until a few weeks ago, Lukashenko's Belarus was allowed to participate in Partnership for Peace. So I think it's about time that unanimity is built within NATO to extend this invitation to Kosovo to join PFP as a first step towards joining NATO. And I think it's also about time that individual member states start vocally supporting our NATO membership. And the same, I would say, I'm not sure if anyone is from Bosnia-Herzegovina here, but I strongly believe that that country should join NATO as well. It would absolutely be such a beacon of hope for long-standing peace and stability. KFOR has been doing an excellent job. It is still necessary there, also because of the problems that we just talked about, especially around border areas, whenever we have, in our long border with Serbia, whenever we have problems with them, because they have a clear mandate to preserve safety and security of all citizens as well as freedom of movement. So they have been working together with our security institutions to make sure that we preserve peace as well as safety and security for all, no matter their ethnicity.
Thank you very much. Next question goes to the gentleman here yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Madam President, I'm Eric Lapoladishvili from Georgia, and Kosovo and Georgia are in the same scenario right now. We are all waiting for the EU membership candidate status. But my question is going to the future. I mean, let's imagine the day when Serbia, without Vučić, decides to join the EU, and I hope that day comes. And let's imagine that Kosovo and Georgia are both in the EU, as well as Ukraine and Moldova. We Georgians and Ukrainians have some things we cannot forgive and we cannot forget. What would be response of Kosovo if Serbia, after what they've done to Kosovo, to Kosovo, what would Kosovo allow Serbia to join the EU if it was over you to decide? I mean, did you get my point?
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you for your question and your prediction that we would be, both us and you, in the EU before Serbia. So I really do hope that by the time Serbia decides to join, first that they mean it. They need to want it the same way that we want it, the same way that the people of Georgia and Ukraine and Moldova want it. Because when they want it, they will understand that there are certain criteria and values that they need to meet. And one of them is rule of law. Practically, there's no rule of law in Serbia right now. There's high-level corruption, no justice, no civil society, no freedom of media, and so on. But one very important aspect is dealing with the past. Dealing with the past means that there should be justice for the victims, that the perpetrators of these victims should face justice. So as you would expect, and I would say it will not be just us, probably Croatia, who is already in the EU, would ask the same, that one, Serbia opens up its archives and tell us where are the missing persons. Almost 2,000 missing persons, civilians, many of them little children, are still missing, and they are in massive graves in Serbia. They need to tell us where they are. It's a human rights issue. Secondly, they need to stop awarding medals and promoting generals and police chiefs who carried out the massacres in Kosovo and Bosnia and Croatia. They need to bring them to justice. And then there's much more, obviously, but we will not be making up any new criteria. These are already EU criteria, EU values. So as an EU member state, we would simply ask them to do what other countries would have to before joining.
Thanks.
They have to, of course. It's part of dealing with the past.
I think we have time for one last question.
Thank you.
Lady in the back.
Hello, thank you for this opportunity. I'm Nane Manukyan from Armenia. While reading the title of this special talk, Left Alone, it made me think about the people of Nagorno-Karabakh and the example of Nagorno-Karabakh and the fact that it might be suppressed and even massacred by Azerbaijan. Brings up the fact that not exercising the right of self-determination under remedial secession might have tragic consequences. In this case, as a person, as a representative of people who had the privilege to exercise this right and also who had support of great powers, don't you feel the responsibility to kind of support the people of Nagorno-Karabakh who want to exercise it? And what prevents Kosovo from supporting it. Thank you.
First and foremost, I believe that both Armenia and Azerbaijan should recognize the independence of Kosovo. Now, putting on my international law professor hat, the case of Kosovo was not a case of secession. It was a case of a dissolution. And this is where there's a big difference. Kosovo had a dual status within former Yugoslavia. It was a constitutive unit of former Yugoslavia with exactly the same rights at that time under the Yugoslav constitution as republics. And under those rights was also the right to self-determination and determine your own status should Yugoslavia go through a process of dissolution. So it's, and of course, as you know, the International Court of Justice at the same time has clarified that the case of Kosovo cannot compare to others. This is the part of international law. So the human rights part, the people of Kosovo show sympathy, show solidarity, show support for all people around the world who are victims of human rights abuses. We don't pick territory. We don't say we will only be showing sympathy for those who live in this territory or that territory, in this country or that country. We show sympathy to everyone that is a victim of human rights abuses because we felt it in our skin. We know how it is to not be allowed to live in your home, to be kicked out of your home, to become a refugee, to lose everything you have, but most importantly, how it is to lose people that you love for the mere fact that you belong to a different ethnicity from that of the aggressor. So I really hope that there will be peace for all the people living in your region, and at the same time that there will come a day where Kosovo will sit next to Armenia and Azerbaijan and other countries in that region in international organizations. We're still striving to become a member of the UN, as you know, and other international organizations, including human rights organizations that would help us out increase the level of human rights protections. But at the same time, it's not like Kosovo is a country that doesn't show sympathy towards others who are going through human rights violations. For us, it's a moral question. It's not a question on who has what right or where to live. But at the same time, I don't think a comparison can be made because the case of Kosovo was not a case of secession. And when it comes to our independence, the International Court of Justice has clarified that it's absolutely in line with international law.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'm sure the audience would be interested in continuing this Q&A session for quite a bit, but our time is, I'm sorry, run out. I want to thank you very, very much. This was an extremely, in my view, an extremely eloquent and impressive presentation of the case that Kosovo can make. And I think if you continue to talk like this to Olaf Scholz, you will win any number of new fans. Not only in the German government, but around the citizenry. So let's give a hand to the President of Kosovo.
And also to Ambassador Ischinger, of course.
I couldn't do it better. Thank you very much to both of you. Thank you very much for that wonderful special talk at the M100 Sanssouci Colloquium. Thank you, Mrs. President. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Yeah, well, that was it. The M100 Sanssouci Colloquium, but that's not M100. Mr. Editor, no, Mr. What is he? Mr. Tagesspiegel? Oh, yeah. Thank you. Because I just want to keep on talking. But this is not M100. We have still the Media Prize Award coming up. On behalf of